Hey, what's up, guys? How you guys doing? Bustin' Jest here. Good to see you. So today, I want to quickly address, make a couple of comments, really, to talk about some of the disagreements that are occurring within the scope of the argument between a historical and a mythological Jesus. So most of you may already be familiar with this argument, but there are many proponents for the theory and the concept that Jesus as a person actually did exist, historicity, or had historicity, historically did exist. And then there's the argument, of course, that he never existed at all and he was only a myth. And in both cases, I think there's agreement that the image of Jesus was adjusted over time. So we're going to be talking about Bart Ehrman specifically today because he's one of the number one most quoted proponents of Jesus's historicity. He's quoted by Christians and agnostics alike. Of course, he himself being an agnostic atheist makes him a very attractive and very quotable person for Christians. And he believes that Jesus was a historical figure, albeit, of course, he didn't believe he was a miracle worker, but he believed he was a real person who was later mythologized into a sorcerer, a son of God, etc., etc. Whereas one of the most predominant alternative views, of course, is the view held by Dr. Richard Carrier, which is a view of a mythological only Jesus. And likewise, there's a transformation that occurs within that theory as well, that the mythological version of Jesus, which was developed based on very clear archetypes that were and motifs that were already evident in that region and time, that he was then later historicized. So Paul writes about a mythological Jesus in Carrier's view, and then later the Gospels are written to begin the process of historicizing and making him seem like a real person who actually walked around. That begins in the Gospel of Mark, according to Carrier's view. So what I want to do though is I'm picking through both Richard Carrier's work. I've been reading a lot of his stuff lately, and I really enjoy it. I've also been looking through Bart Ehrman's work and picking through that, and of course I've been picking through his stuff for a long time. And I really enjoy some of his stuff, and if other things of his, bother me a little bit. But I'm sure he's already aware that's kind of the way it is in this field. So I just want to quickly touch on basically two major areas of interest, I guess, based on stuff that Bart Ehrman said in the opening of one of his books called "Did Jesus Exist? The Historical Argument for Jesus of Nazareth." So I've written up some notes here. I'm going to read them to you and walk you through and show you, of course, some stuff on the screen here, some data that I think you'll find very interesting. I hope you are able to follow along and can see my point. So jumping straight in the defense of the position that Jesus of Nazareth was a historical figure who was later mythologized into the miracle worker of Christianity today, Bart Ehrman, the author of Did Jesus Exist?, makes some interesting statements designed to engender trust in the historical view over one of mythicism. Namely, Bart, an agnostic atheist, makes the argument that the reader should trust the quote-unquote consensus of the current seminary-trained academia. For example, in the opening of his book, he says, quote, "I should say at the outset that none of this quote-unquote mythicist literature is written by scholars trained in the New Testament or early Christian studies, teaching at the major or even minor accredited theological seminaries, divinity schools, universities, or colleges of North America or Europe or anywhere else in the world. And of the thousands of scholars of early Christianity who do teach at such schools, none of them, to my knowledge, has any doubts that Jesus existed," end quote. So additionally, Ehrman claims that there is no incentive of any kind for he or his peers to retain their historical view. He says, quote, "Many of these scholars have no vested interest in the matter. As it turns out, I myself do not either. I am not a Christian. I have no interest in promoting a Christian cause or a Christian agenda. I am an agnostic with atheist leanings, and my life and views of the world would be approximately the same whether or not Jesus existed. My beliefs would vary little. The answer to the question of Jesus' historical existence will not make me more or less happy, content, hopeful, likable, rich, famous, or immortal. And this, my friends, is where I must interject and vehemently disagree. Personally, I believe that there is sincere incentive, both for Bart Ehrman on a personal level, and there's also incentive on a professional level for the colleagues he generalizes his arguments with so frequently. Their job, their credibility, and their income. It's really just that simple. Let's first look at the industry as a whole. Is there a good reason why the mainstream college consensus on the historicity of Jesus may be currently designed to support the Christian tradition of a historical Jesus? Of course there is. According to a 2018 study by Concordia University, Irvine, Christian higher education in the United States is responsible for more than $60 billion in economic impact. And I'm going to leave the links for all of these different articles for you below so you can go dig through these more if you like. But commissioned by the Council for Christian Colleges and Universities, CCCCU, the study calculates the impact on the national economy of its 142 Christian colleges and universities across the country, collectively educating 445,000 students, employing 72,000 faculty and staff, and serving 3.5 million alumni around the world. The study finds that through their operations, capital investments, and additional alumni earning power, these institutions generate more than $60 billion in economic impact each year, equivalent to $166 million generated per day for the U.S. economy. At a time when higher education is under heavy scrutiny for its value proposition, this is where it gets really interesting to me. I'm just going to read this section and we'll leave this article. This study's findings are particularly pertinent. Not only do Christian institutions profoundly affect the lives of students through their shared commitment to advancing faith and intellect for the common good, that's the front statement there, but here's the truth. They also benefit the national economy and deliver a significant return on investment to the federal government. Wow. All right, so additionally, one of the key findings from the report, I'm going to go ahead and scroll down here, and there's key findings from the report. You can dig through these at your own leisure. But one of the key findings from the report is that the student loan default rate for graduates, here we go, from CCCU institutions, which is Christian college institutions, is 6.3%, which is nearly half of the national average. Next, I want to point out that even though they are tax exempt, CCCU institutions, Christian universities, still generate $9.7 billion in federal tax revenue each year. This is where it gets really interesting to me. For every $1 in federal grant money a student receives, Christian institutions generate more than $20 in federal tax revenue. I don't know if you guys are understanding what that means, but we'll talk about it again in just one second. Last, 1 in 3 CCCU students are first-generation college students. Now, there's more data here, obviously, and feel free to dig through all this and pick around. But these are the 3 things that I really wanted to highlight for a very specific cause. Let me just break this down for you based on what I'm seeing here. The U.S. economy and the entire education industry is dramatically impacted by Christian colleges. The federal government and private financial institutions, such as banks, benefit dramatically, with Christian school alumni being twice as likely to pay their student loans and not let them go into default. So Christian students represent an incredibly valuable source of financial activity in multiple educational and financial markets. And with 1 in 3 CCCU students becoming the first of their family to seek a college degree, it should be clear that these Christian universities are performing their recruiting duties extremely well. So these statistics clearly state that there is far too much money in Christian education for anyone to ignore it as a critical factor in the development of policy. Like the study stated earlier, quote, the Christian institutions, also benefit the national economy and deliver a significant ROI to the national government, end quote. And also, for every $1 in federal grant money a student receives, Christian institutions generate more than $20 in federal revenue. That's huge. That's a 20x return on investment, my friends. When the federal government invests in Christian college students through federal grants, they receive a 20 times return on their investment. That is insane. Personally, I believe this information alone represents a lot of reasons to not anger the mainstream Christian tradition that Jesus was a historical figure. But let's pause. That's only the Christian schools. What incentive would secular schools have to not offend the Christian tradition? Let's take a look. According to the Pew Research Center's research on college students and religious landscape, a whopping 66% of all college graduates in the United States are, you guessed it, Christian. All right, and once again, I'm going to leave the link for this as well. You can dig through all the additional data here. I'm going to point out some of the additional data for you guys to review. But this is pretty telling information right here. The second largest group, the religiously unaffiliated nuns, which include atheists, agnostics, and nothing in particular, only represented 25% of grads when combined. So all the nothing in particulars only represent 25% of college students in the secular American colleges. Additionally, 72% of the graduates indicated that religion in one's life was either very important or somewhat important. Additionally, 63% of college graduates indicated that they hold a belief in heaven, and 51% of American college graduates said that they pray on a daily basis. So all of the non-Christian faiths only made up 9% of the total secular college population. So are you starting to see the bigger picture here? On an institutional level, I believe that it only makes financial sense statistically to not upset the largest paying demographic the secular universities possess, the Christian student. Certainly, in the race for competitive enrollment at increasingly expensive universities, there is little doubt that paid quote-unquote scholars and professors from these institutions would have very little incentive to adopt a theory so incredibly offensive to Christians as Jesus mythicism. At least with the historical Jesus, the professor and the college itself leaves enough room for the Christian students of the nation to continue believing with faith that the historical Jesus that no scholar denies existed, according to Bart Ehrman, truly was the savior of the world. So essentially, they're leaving just enough wiggle room for them to say, well, he did technically live. So by faith, if you want to continue believing that he was the Son of God, go ahead, because he was there. The reality, of course, is that, quote, real scholars do question the historicity of Jesus, without a doubt. And the list of scholars willing to admit that publicly is growing. But I doubt that any of them will be invited to lead any major university theology departments anytime soon, for obvious reasons. I can read the fictitious newspaper headlines now. Fill-in-the-blank university denies Christ. Disenrollments soar. Remember, 66% of students at secular American colleges are Christian, who most certainly believe, and their paying parents most certainly believe, that Jesus was a historical figure. Talk about eggshells. Last, I just want to quickly touch again on Ehrman's statement that he personally is in no way vested in the outcome of the debate between a historical and mythological Jesus. Really, bro? Quote, the answer to the question of Jesus' historical existence will not make me more or less happy, content, hopeful, likable, rich, famous, or immortal. Bart Ehrman. Again, I have to disagree. I can't help but think that Dr. Ehrman's legacy hangs in the balance with this argument, since he's written so extensively to disprove the mythicist view and so adamantly declares Jesus' historicity as a fact that no scholar denies. There are over 25 books by Ehrman on Amazon. He's written and edited over 30, including 3 college textbooks and 6 New York Times bestsellers. He is a highly paid, highly respected, and highly referenced, especially by Christians, writer. Ehrman has been made famous, quoted. He's been brought on television shows. He has DVD study courses and thousands of hours of teaching time. How much of his work would still be considered relevant if he were wrong or completely changed his mind? So long as his mind isn't changed, neither is his investment into his own conclusions. Let's not pretend that the scholarly consensus on high has always made decisions about what information is accepted and canonized, and which information and which scholars are rejected and ostracized with pure scientific transparency and without financial consideration. We know from countless stories across industries that unacceptable research grants are not granted, and undesirable findings are not found, or they're hardly found when they disrupt the status quo and cash flow. Last, my suspicion of this unfortunate educational climate is only strengthened by comments from other PhDs. For example, during one of his online studies, Dr. Richard Carrier, the author of Jesus from Outer Space, What the Earliest Christians Really Believed About Christ, he suggested that many departmental scholars are forced to sign agreements stating they won't teach certain views and theories, and that this one, a mythological only Jesus, is absolutely one of them. From a departmental and institutional perspective, and in light of all the financial demographics and statistics we just looked at, I can certainly understand why. My hypothesis is simply this. Until mainstream secular institutions are ready to assume 66% losses in revenue, and theological universities are ready to assume devastating losses. 99%? I don't even know. And until the federal government is ready to assume the loss of up to $60 billion in economic impact activity and stop receiving its 20x return on investment into Christian students. Until these things happen, or we experience a vast cultural shift away from Christianity in the future, Bart Ehrman will be technically able to continue making the claim that this mythicist view is not popular among mainstream scholars and mainstream professors. But with the full academic and financial context in view, I can't pretend it doesn't feel like sort of a misleading statement. Just as Bart already knows that his historical version of Jesus doesn't include miracles or salvation of any kind, he's still comfortable allowing Christians to use his work to promote their religious agenda, so long as his book is being sold and he's being asked to speak around the world. Likewise, Ehrman knows that a university professor teaching against a historical Jesus will certainly not last within the halls of a predominantly Christian-funded organization, which is the American college system. Yet he's comfortable making statements designed to imply that the reason for this is unbiased, purely analytical, logical, and scientific. The reality, however, is they're just not allowed. So don't tell me that no mainstream scholars that I know of doubt a historical Jesus when they simply are publicly not allowed to. And please don't tell me that you have no financial incentive or no personal incentive to maintain the credibility of all of your own work, which you've been working on for years and years and years. Of course you do. Of course you do. You don't want to be made into a fool, and you don't want it to be demonstrated, obviously, that the mythicist view isn't, in fact, as nuts as you make it out to be. So that's all I really want to comment on for now. There's, like Bart himself said, we could go back and forth forever on all the details of each fact. I really believe that if you want to get the full argument from both sides, you have to read Dr. Richard Carrier's Jesus from Outer Space book, or his other super scholarly writings in the book on the historicity of Jesus. And I think if you read both of those and read Bart Ehrman's work, then you'll have a better understanding of what the full debate is here. But again, I'm personally really, really keen on the theory of a mythological only Jesus being developed into a historical figure, and for all the reasons that Dr. Richard Carrier lays out, as well as other scholars like Dr. MacDonald, who have shown mimetic connections between the Gospel of Mark and Homer, or the mimetic connections between Luke and Mark and all that. So personally, I lean towards the idea that he never really literally historically existed. And I just wanted to respond to Bart Ehrman and say, look, mainstream scholars aren't teaching that in main schools. mainstream schools right now, but that's not really a point to be made. That really doesn't make any difference. The facts are still the facts, regardless of how many people believe them. But you're kind of appealing to this whole like, well, everyone thinks this. Well, everyone's not allowed to talk about. Not everyone's allowed to voice their opinion in the university system, and you know that. So anyway, that's it for now, guys. I'll have more for you coming soon, more arguments of all kinds in different directions. But just wanted to leave that there. There is a $60 billion reason for a historical Jesus, and this is my response to that statement by Dr. Bart Ehrman. Oh yeah, and if you haven't had a chance to yet, don't forget to join me over on my other channel, Justin Best, where I'll be doing just personal vlog stuff if you're interested. Don't forget to like the video if you enjoy the content, and subscribe and click the bell notification so that you get notified the next time I post. And very soon here, I'll be posting, I'm actually doing a interview with Jackie. This is going to be really interesting because we're going to talk about digital ads and digital targeting, which is extremely interesting to me. So anyway, I'll see you guys there when that comes out. And until next time, I'm Bustin' Jest. Later.